report. So joining us now, Glenn Thrush, who reports on the Justice Department for the New York Times, also the host of Pablo Torre Finds Out on Meadowlark Media, Msnbc contributor Pablo Torre, and CEO of the Messina Group, Jim Messina. He served as White House Deputy Chief of Staff to President Obama and ran his 2012 re-election campaign. So, Glenn, your latest piece for the New York Times that you co-authored focuses on the controversy surrounding the Trump administration regarding its handling of the Epstein case files. Quote, the blowback over the Epstein case has raged unabated for nearly a week since the Justice Department and FBI released a memo closing the probe and affirming previous findings that Mr. Epstein's death had been a suicide. It has defied the patterns of previous Trump controversies, provoking criticism from activists on the right, increasingly willing to cast doubt on Mr. Trump's actions and motives, and not just place blame on his surrogates and subordinates.
So, Glenn, not that this would help the president with his MAGA base, but we had Ken Delaney on earlier this morning talking about how he, Tom Winters, other people in NBC have been reporting for years that there was no Jeffrey Epstein client list, no magical list out there to be had. The FBI and the Justice Department came to the conclusion. I guess the question is, why did we see Dan Bongino and we initially heard Kash Patel being so upset about what Pam Bondi had said, when in fact everybody seemed to be shoulder to shoulder on that memo with the same conclusions?
Well, it's hard to be shoulder to shoulder when your hide is on the line. And what happened was Bongino and Patel, who remember accumulated significant podcast audiences by promoting conspiracy theories. They made a profit on it. They increased their political capital that got them these jobs in the first place, started to realize that the blowback from the MAGA base was going to hurt their individual standing. And look, this has always been sort of a Mad Max administration. It's every person for themselves. This is a very unforgiving environment. And the original sin here came back in February when Bondi, for reasons that are still, frankly, inexplicable, decided to crash this meeting of MAGA influencers in the Roosevelt Room and personally hand out these white binders that were labeled the Epstein Files Phase 1 that really contained very, very little. What then happened over the next couple of weeks, and myself and my colleagues reported on this, was Patel on his end at the FBI deployed dozens and dozens, perhaps hundreds of agents to pour through previously reviewed material at this facility in Winchester, Virginia. And Bondi, quite extraordinarily, diverted at least a dozen members of DOJ's National Security Division, who are responsible for looking at terrorism, foreign interference in business and elections, to go through stuff that had been the subject of at least 2 Justice Department investigations that had no national security implications on a man who had been dead for more than a half decade.
So, Glenn, a great point there underscoring some of the personal motivations here by Kash Patel, Don Bongino, and others. This is a firestorm, though, that doesn't seem like it's fading anytime soon, despite, in fact, President Trump's social media post, I think, only added to it over the weekend, contrary to his intent. So when you talk to people in the Justice Department, is there a more of a there? Like, we're all going to watch, like, is Don Bongino going to show up for work today? Like, where does this go from here? Because it seems like efforts to turn the page just simply aren't going to be successful. This is a rare moment of MAGA rebellion.
Well, yeah, and it's creating enormous pressures inside. I am told that Bondi, I think this breakup between Bondi and Bongino is pretty much irreconcilable. I think there were some attempts over the weekend to negotiate some sort of a détente, but I can tell you from Bondi's end, I don't think she really wants to see him back. This dust-up, and we're talking about a confrontation in Susie Wiles' office in the White House on Wednesday, in which Bondi, according to my sources, confronted Bongino directly about a bunch of stories that they believe he had leaked against her in the conservative media. Bongino denied it. But I've heard various versions of this account. But really from then on, Bongino stops showing up to work. And I think more interestingly, Kash Patel basically goes underground for a couple of days. And there was significant anxiety, I think, among Bondi allies what Patel was going to do. Now, that fever sort of broke on Saturday when Patel said he was staying. You know, if Bongino leaves, it wasn't going to be a twofer. But there was a very curious sort of court spectacle yesterday at this soccer match. I am told from sources that the expectation, at least at some point last week, was that Patel would show up to the FIFA event in Bondi's presence. He was not there. And there was this very conspicuous, you showed this photograph earlier, this very conspicuous thumbs up visually, as if you hadn't gotten it from Trump's very long Truth Social post, of a thumbs up while Bondi and her husband are gazing adoringly up at him at the event. You really can't make this stuff up. So the question here is, how does this resolve? Not necessarily with Bongino. I think he will either leave or they will figure out some sort of an exit strategy. But it is the Kash Patel, Pam Bondi space that I think is probably worth looking at.
And Kash Patel, of course, tweeted over the weekend that he was staying around and he was in support of the president.
Well, conservative writer David French has a new opinion piece in the New York Times entitled "MAGA is Tearing Itself Apart Over Jeffrey Epstein," and he writes in part, quote, "The Epstein story mattered so much in MAGA circles because it was a key element in their indictment of America's so-called ruling class. Trump's appeal to the Republican base isn't just rooted in his supporters' extraordinary affection for the man. It's also rooted in their almost indescribably dark view of the American government. Why are they so keen to burn it all down? Well, if you believe your government is populated by people so depraved that they'd participate in and cover up the systematic sexual abuse of children, then you wouldn't just want them out of office. You'd want them prosecuted, imprisoned, and maybe even executed. And you'd want all the power you'd need to make that happen." And I guess they felt they had that in Donald Trump.
Yeah, I guess so. Jim, I don't want to dig too deep here, but let's dig deep on why this matters so much to the MAGA base. Donald Trump, and we've all been saying this for years, Donald Trump has been sort of the vessel for millions and millions of Americans' distrust for what the federal government's done, what it hasn't done, what it said, what it hasn't said, the things that it's kept secret. I remember watching Ken Burns' documentary, and about halfway through, looking at all the working class guys who had been lied to by the Johnson administration and the Nixon administration, who were saying we can't win this war, and yet an entire generation scarred by Vietnam. Then you follow up with Watergate, then you we can keep going through all the things that have happened. And there's just this cynicism about the federal government telling them. Last week we had Mark Caputo on talking about how the CIA had been lying for 62 years about a guy who had for the CIA who had been dealing with Lee Harvey Oswald. So put this in a larger context, first of all, that this is not just about Jeffrey Epstein and it's not just about Donald Trump, but how Donald Trump is really a reaction to 50 years of distrust from the American people, and that why this Epstein case may be cutting so hard into this base.
Yeah, Joe, you're exactly right. This is something I'm really watching closely. And the reason, to your point, since Donald Trump came onto the political scene 10 years ago, he's been Teflon. He's been unable to kind of be messed with or pushed off of his base. His base adores him. And the reason they adore him is because he is the vessel for their hopes and dreams about getting the government back in control. When I ran President